You know, it's a joy for me to introduce to you Jim Fletcher. I met Jim a few years ago at actually a Bible prophecy conference in Dallas, Texas. And then I've been following him on, particularly on RaptureReady.com. He's got a weekly article on Israel there, a prolific communicator on the things relating to Israel, knows what's happening in Israel and the attacks against Israel, both from within and without. And he's written for a number of publications, World Net Daily, and he'll have to tell us all he writes for here. But it's a privilege to have Jim Fletcher with us, so let's welcome Jim this morning.
Thank you very much, Joe. I especially appreciate a pastor who will emphasize Bible prophecy today. And also thank you to Sarah and Cyrus and Angela for taking care of me and for coordinating things. I appreciate that very much as well. Let's see here. Okay. All right, are we on? Okay, this isn't quite what I have. I always have a glitch at the start. So let me try this again. There we go. Well, thanks again. It's always a privilege to be with fellow believers. Sometimes I actually speak to people who aren't, and it's a little disconcerting sometimes, but I appreciate being with family. And by the way, one of the things unique to our time, even in the American church today, is the fact that there's a downturn in the teaching of Bible prophecy. There's less an emphasis on it. It's a controversy to some. There are various reasons, but I have to tell you that the happiest and most contented people that I know are Bible-believing Christians that believe in Bible prophecy. And a lot of our critics, like Brian McLaren, accuse us of following an eschatology of abandonment, that we're escapists. Well, I think we're going to glory. And I think we also you live in an epic moment in world history. And what a privilege. And so as we look at some of the things that are going on in our world today, in the church and in the world in general, one of the interesting phenomena to me, and a subject of a lot of research for me now, I write for, as Joe said, several places, including BeliefNet and the Jerusalem Post, is the opposition to Israel from within the American church. And I have to tell you, I grew up being taught Bible prophecy, and to be frank with you, I never expected this. I could see it coming from other directions, but I never thought that I would see opposition to Israel and the Jewish people from within the church. I was, many years ago, the first trip I made to Israel was on the Temple Mount one afternoon with a friend. And we were talking, and he was talking about this subject, and he said, you know, can you imagine some of the Christian leaders today who are hesitant or even fearful or hostile to Israel standing in front of Joshua? What would he do? What would he say to them? And it's something that always stuck in my mind. You know, I always tell people that what you see in the Bible is what you see in the real world. The Bible is reality. And because I believe Scripture, I don't, for example, worry about Iran. Who is in trouble in that situation? It's not the Israelis. In the last days, it's not Israel that's in trouble, it's everybody else. And Iran is going to lose huge. I'm more worried, though, about people in my own community. That includes the American church, specifically the evangelical church, which I've always been in. In the heyday of what is called Christian Zionism, there were great men. David Lewis, pictured on the right, my late friend and mentor, a wonderful Assemblies of God evangelist and a champion for Israel all his life. Here he's giving an award to a very young John Hagee in the 70s. It was easy back in those days to feel the headwinds of the movement. And churches were everywhere, on every block were having conferences like this, and people were talking about Israel in the wake of the Six-Day War and things like that. Unfortunately, there came a shift, and we know that the enemy always works to undermine the works of the Lord to the degree that he can, and so he began to work in this community, and there was a shift. You know, one time you would have like a Jerry Falwell meeting Menachem Begin in Israel, prime minister. And in today's world, you had several years ago Yasser Arafat meeting a delegation of Christians from around the world, including Southern Baptist Convention's Dr. Richard Land. It doesn't mean that Dr. Land is pro-Yasser Arafat, but the Palestinians learned after the Six-Day War that they weren't going to defeat Israel on the battlefield. They weren't going to defeat them head-to-head. And so Arafat, whom I refer to as the architect of Palestinian propaganda, his Soviet handlers in the 60s and 70s sat him down and explained to him, you know, you're going to have to stop this counter-revolutionary persona. You're going to have to stop hijacking planes and blowing people up and things like that. You're going to have to reinvent yourself as a freedom fighter. Okay? Now, Arafat was a serial killer, but he was also a student of history. And he recognized that what they were telling him was correct. And so he began to reinvent himself. And he dispatched his underlings to the West to, frankly, fool people in every sphere, politics, the media, but also in religious circles. There's a great book by a man named Paul Kengor. He wrote a book called Dupes, and I like this quote. Frank Marshall Davis made heavy use of the Christian left. Some of these Christians were duped liberals, whereas others were closet communists, predators, encircling unsuspecting dupes. And by the way, Frank Marshall Davis was a person that Barack Obama learned from, and he considered him a mentor. A journalist in the 40s, he wrote about the glories and wonderful situation in the Soviet Union. So this began a long time ago, and the hallmark in the beginning was that they would target the Christian left. Now, a lot of times, even in my Israel Watch column at Rapture Ready, people, write to me every week and they say, look, don't call them the Christian left, and we get into that little debate. Well, you have to have some identifying label for them, and that's what they refer to themselves as, the Christian left, the mainline churches in particular. Historically, the United Methodist Church, the Presbyterians, the Lutherans, the Episcopalians have always been, at best, indifferent to Israel, but often, sadly, overtly hostile. Okay? So that was the situation that existed for decades. Harry Ward co-founded the ACLU. He was affiliated with the Methodist Church. Considered to be one of the biggest dupes of all time. who the Soviets managed to get to and influence. Jim Winkler on the right is much more contemporary, affiliated with the United Methodist Church. They have a beautiful building in Washington, D.C., and they work overtime to undermine Israel in the public square. They have been pro-Palestinian for many, many, many years. Now, here's where we're taking another shift, and this is the thing that surprised me. I ran onto this about 2 years ago. For a while, I had been noticing a downturn in pro-Israel support in general. I didn't really understand where it was coming from. I didn't know what that was all about. But the more I researched and investigated, the more I realized that the traditional anti-Israel fervor in the mainline churches and in some Catholic traditions was being transplanted to the American evangelical church. And this was a new thing. Now, it didn't happen overnight. They had prepared for this for, I would argue, for 100 years, starting when the seminaries were hijacked by liberal scholarship. But now we're seeing the transformation of the American evangelical church, and this afternoon I'll talk about the other leg of this topic of end times that I research, Israel and the apostasy that's growing in the church. And so we have a situation today where that old line liberalism is absolutely burrowing itself into the evangelical church today. In October, I was in Atlanta for a Catalyst conference. Catalyst is becoming one of the leading change agents in the American church. It is a very sophisticated organization that purports to teach leadership skills to pastors and youth workers, people like that. They have 3 major conferences a year in Southern California, Dallas, and Atlanta. And a hallmark of these conferences is a center-left agenda. For example, in 2011, they invited Dr. Cornel West to speak. Now, Cornel West is a radical liberation theologian from Princeton. Why in the world they would have him speak there, I don't know. I asked their executive director, and he wouldn't tell me. But the speaking schedule at conferences like this are stacked with people of a center-left persuasion. And one of the talks that I was most interested to hear was that of Lynn Hybels. Lynn Hybels and her husband Bill co-founded the Willow Creek Association. You've heard of Willow Creek Church near Chicago. Hugely influential, basically a denomination. And Lynn Hybels, by her own admission, about 2 years ago became very interested in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and she began to travel to what she calls Israel-Palestine. Now, one of the things that you have to get clear in your mind is that when the word Palestine is used today, it's a political term, okay? I don't know where Palestine is. It used to be a geographical term, and it might be a sovereign entity at some point if the Palestinians and the United Nations get their way. But for the present, Palestine doesn't exist. And yet, they're using the term more and more to get people more and more used to it, and they're succeeding. And I will tell you this, these people that I'm describing, they are winning, okay? I believe in being a realist. I don't want to see the world the way I wish it was. I want to see it the way it is. And they're winning. Now, they won't ultimately win, but they are now, and they're making serious inroads into the millennial generation, the 18 to 35-year-olds who are idealistic, praise the Lord. They obviously love the Lord and want to do good in the world, and they're impressionable. And they are being influenced right now on a scale that you can't imagine to side with the Palestinians and to jettison Israel. You know, one of the things that is a signpost of the last days is the intensifying pressure on Israel and Jews worldwide. And we see that happening day by day by day, more and more and more pressure from different circles. This is a very key group for the Palestinians to cultivate. And Lynn Hybels gave a talk that was skewed heavily to the Palestinians. For example, she told the audience that the Jews were given the majority of Mandate Palestine for a state. That is false. But the audience applauded. They were with her. You can only imagine how influential Willow Creek is when the founders believe this. How many people do you think they're influencing? When people ask me, we talk about wars and earthquakes and pestilence and things like that, and certainly all of those things exist in the world. You could argue that some of them are intensifying. But when people say, what is the sign that we're living in the last days? And I get this a lot from secular people who aren't believers at all. There's only one answer. It's Israel. This is what I want you to wrap your minds around. And I know that you do, but if we could somehow impart this truth to other people, what a different world it would be. But you live in a time when the Jews have re-entered history. They have come back. This is unparalleled in history. The Jews have come back. Remember what the prophet said in Zechariah chapter 12, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people around about it, when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And then in that day I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it." All. We were having a conversation a minute ago about Gary DeMar. And Gary DeMar is a preterist and believes that the prophecies were fulfilled in AD 70, generally speaking. And he and I had, I guess you could call a debate once. And we were talking about this point, and he wanted to infer that this passage was simply talking about the Roman 10th Legion that laid siege to Jerusalem. But if you talk to any Hebrew scholar in the world, or if you talk to anybody in the world who can read, all means all. This is a unique moment in history. All of the world, the global community, the international community, is obsessed with Israel. They are obsessed with and hate Jewish sovereignty in Jerusalem. This is the flashpoint. This will be the trigger for this battle for Jerusalem. And yet, many of the leading lights in evangelical leadership in America today don't get that at all. They're part of the all. Isn't that extraordinary? But even though that situation exists, and you know what? I have friends who say, boy, I wish I'd lived in the 19th century when things were easier. Well, we don't. And more than that, what a miracle that God let you live in this time when you can see Israel. Israel is alive. They may not like it, but they're a member of the United Nations. They exist. This is the great truth that the Jews' enemies will never be able to overcome. Scripture tells us that when God brings them back for the final time, that it will be for the last time, and He alone will uphold them and fight for them as He fought for them in the days of old. What a magnificent scene unfolding for us to sit back and get to watch. I was in Jerusalem a couple of years ago. I took my son with me. He was 19. We were walking through an archaeological park, and I saw this scene, and it just really electrified me. Here's an ancient arch they've unearthed, and in the middle of it, in the background, is the flag of Israel flying over the old city. Do you understand how astonishing that is? They were gone for 1,800 years. The Assyrians are gone. The Babylonians are gone. They're still gone. Where is Israel? Returned. Redeemed. Mark Twain had a wonderful quote. He said, of all those ancient civilizations, they came and arose and made a great noise, but they sit in twilight now. He said the Jews saw them all, beat them all, and the Jew is now what he always was. What is the secret to his immortality? Doesn't that want to make you cry? I have a lot of Jewish and Israeli friends, and every time I have so much as a conversation with one of them, the hair stands up on the back of my neck. They shouldn't be here. I can talk to a friend in Israel. That's unbelievable. What a privilege to see Bible prophecy unfold. There, as I said, is a growing number, growing almost by the month, because I track this every day. Growing number of evangelical leaders who are making very disturbing statements about Israel and Jewish people. Here is John Piper basically saying that people in Israel today don't have any right to that land. But look at how many people follow John Piper. And you know what? It really does pain me to tell you this, but there are a lot more than him. D. James Kennedy, Chuck Colson, Skip Ryan. They would tell you that they support Israel's right to security, but they do not see a link between the modern Israelis and the Israelites in the Bible. Isn't that mind-boggling? Nobody asked the Tibetans to prove their lineage, or the Alaskans, or people in Brazil. Only the Jews. And there's an effort now to separate the people that live in Israel today from the Bible. Okay? Huge effort being made in many, many different ways. There are change agents like Brian McLaren. As I mentioned before, he accuses us of practicing eschatology of abandonment. He also really doesn't like eschatology that tells us that the Lord is going to soon return. One of the things most hated in the church today in America is the teaching of the rapture. Isn't that amazing? McLaren also says, notice here, the rights of Palestinians are ignored in favor of the Israeli state, as if God is happy to bless some people at the expense of others. How can a man this smart be this undiscerning? I would suggest to you that many of them want to be. They don't want to believe it. If you believe in a God majestic enough to bring back an ancient people after 1,800 years, then you're talking about somebody that can tell you how you should live your life. And this they don't want. Now, McLaren is a fairly easy target because even though he calls himself an evangelical, and by the way, they're using this term to burrow into evangelical churches. They know they're not evangelicals. But he's a bit of an easier target because he puts himself out there as a person on the left. He doesn't make any bones about that. But I would suggest to you that there are disturbing signs within evangelicalism right now that subtle forms of replacement theology are being practiced. This is Stephen Furtick, pastor of Elevation Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, one of the rising stars in leadership today. They have a mega church. Furtick has written 2 books, Sun Stand Still, and the more recent book called Greater. And in both, he inserts himself into biblical stories about the Israelites, whether it's prophets or warriors like Joshua. Now, they don't really teach the history of the Jewish people, okay? They teach this as a Christian self-help course. That you can pray a sun stand still prayer, and God is going to do amazing things in your life materially, and you're going to be a rising leader and things like this. I view this as a problem because it's really endemic within the evangelical church, this kind of teaching. When they do teach out of the Old Testament, many of them, it's this stuff. Now, keep in mind that one of the things that paved the way for Hitler in Nazi Germany was the de-emphasis of the Old Testament in the German churches. All the high-ranking Nazis were good Catholics and Lutherans. And if they heard any teaching in their churches about the Old Testament at all, it was spiritualized, it was metaphor, it was anything but what it is. And it desensitized and dumbed down the population. So that when the moment came for the Holocaust, the German people went along with it. And they butchered men, women, and children because they didn't see the Jews for who they are. I would say to you that today in America, the church is not teaching people who the Jewish people really are. They are not teaching the emphasis of Israel, the specialness of Israel, to their detriment. There's a generational shift that is rapidly gaining ground. Steve Strang is what I would call a media mogul in Florida. Charismatic publisher of Charisma Magazine and others, has a big publishing house. Steve Strang has been a pro-Israel advocate for 35 years at least, well known in that community. His son Cameron publishes Relevant Magazine, which appeals to that millennial crowd that I was telling you about earlier. In the pages of Relevant Magazine, you will see articles that denigrate, defame, marginalize Israel, make fun of Bible prophecy teachers in a big way. So this is what's happened. The fathers were largely solid. The sons are going to the left, almost to a man. It's an amazing phenomenon to watch. Here, Cameron Strang had tweeted a picture last year of his trip to what he calls Israel-Palestine, and of course he's positioned himself in front of the security fence, which they call an apartheid wall, making a political statement. He's siding with the Palestinians. It's popular for young people today to lionize people like Nelson Mandela, the man who was imprisoned in South Africa for 27 years because of apartheid. But the problem with Mandela is Mandela hugs and hobnobs with dictators and communists around the world. Mandela has a leftist worldview. And here he's lent his name to another boycott Israel movement, Free Palestine, boycott Israel. And the tagline is apartheid, wrong in South Africa, wrong in Palestine. Well, Israel has to defend herself militarily. She also has to defend herself this way today and explain why they're not an apartheid state. Arabs serve in the Knesset. People don't know these things. They only hear the propaganda. But if you were to go to a Catalyst conference and just walk up to any young person at random and ask him what he thinks about Nelson Mandela, he probably will be wearing a Mandela t-shirt or a Che Guevara t-shirt. This is where it is. This passage in Zechariah, the last 4 chapters in particular of that book are absolutely riveting. And As I mentioned before, when we look at who hates Israel today, who is an enemy of Israel, it's everybody. Okay? Everybody. Again, I said earlier, all the nations will gather against Jerusalem to battle. But then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as when he fights on a day of battle. In that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which is in front of Jerusalem on the east, etc. That's real history. And it's history yet future. In the soon future, I would argue. And yet, you would be absolutely amazed at the number of Christian leaders in America who would reject that. I mean, I was looking at the copy of the Quest Study Bible one day. And I always go to Ezekiel 37, the famous dry bones passage, when I see a new Bible, because I want to know where they're at. Because everything is bias, okay? I'm biased toward Israel. The Quest Study Bible said one of the possible reasons for the reestablishment of Israel and the reality of the Jews in the land today is just a coincidence. A coincidence? Well, come on. You know what I tell people when they say things like that to me? You got to do better than that. That's not a good enough answer. What do you do with it? What do you do with the reality of the Jews back in the land? I'll tell you what it is. It's the greatest confirmation of the majesty and power of the living God. I wish and pray more people understood that. Another leftist Christian, Shane Claiborne, writes books with Tony Campolo. Campolo has been a long-time advocate for the Palestinians, and he's mentoring Claiborne and bringing him along here. Claiborne is with Alex Awad at the so-called Christ at the Checkpoint conference a couple of years ago. This is a confab of Israel-hating groups organized by the Palestinians. And if you want to understand the essence of what this is PLO, Palestinian Authority, official policy being presented to church leaders. Okay? It's not Palestinian Christians, as is often stated. They're feeding them the PLO line, right down the line. Gabe Lyons on the right founded an organization called Q, another young progressive, hate to date myself and sound silly, but a hip type presenter. And here he's interviewing Sami Awad. Sami Awad, a Christian Palestinian from Bethlehem, director of the Holy Land Trust. Sami Awad is the leading light among American Christians who want to influence the churches for the Palestinians. They bring him over. He and Lynn Hybels are very good friends. They bring him over on speaking tours. And he is changing the face of the American church with regard to Israel and the Palestinians. Here is another organization, Sojourners. Director is Jim Wallace. Wallace is a leftist. Some would argue he's a Marxist. He sometimes calls himself an evangelical. He's interested in social justice issues, and one of the things they do is bash Israel in their magazine every chance they get. And notice even, I have a journalism degree, and so I like to see how people use their propaganda in subtle ways. Notice the photo here with this article bashing Israel. It's an Israeli soldier at a checkpoint, and he's got a machine gun trained on the poor Palestinians standing there in a ball cap. You know what they're saying about Israel today? Well, they've just become the new Nazis. They're doing to the Palestinians what the Nazis did to them. This kind of stuff is pumped into the churches literally on a daily basis. I mean, read blogs, read Read periodicals. Look at what's happening at conferences they're holding. Hank Hanegraaff heard coast to coast on the radio, the Bible Answer Man, self-described Bible Answer Man, completely wrong about prophecy in Israel. Here he's touting an interview that he did with Gary Burge, the professor at Wheaton in Chicago. Gary Burge, one of the leading Israel attackers in the evangelical church. Hank never misses an opportunity to bash Israel. He actually went to and spoke at a conference in Tehran last year and came back and said that much of what we hear about Iran is just simply wrong. Who is he? He's the same kind of dupe that the Soviets found in the 20s and 30s. Donald Miller. Relevant magazine says that Miller's book in 2003, Blue Like Jazz, was a leading catalyst in changing the worldview of the millennial generation. Miller is a full-time writer. He has a website called storylineblog.com. He's another relatively young guy who, among other things, bashes Israel. And in November, he wrote a blog that I read first thing that morning. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was like a Hamas leaflet that Hamas passes out to their own people. He actually accused the Israelis of controlling the caloric intake of Gazans. Food rationing? They're sending food in. They engage in battle with their enemies, and after the battle is over, they send relief in. Not according to Donald Miller. He also later edited it out by that afternoon, accused Benjamin Netanyahu of having more blood on his hands than terrorists. Well, that was over the top, and somebody told him to take it out of the blog, and he did. But the rest of it is still there. And I've asked him several times for documentation, what his sources are. He won't even talk to me. Do you know why he won't talk to me? He knows the truth. He knows he doesn't have any sources, or he would have posted them. Bob Roberts Jr., pastor of Northwood Church in Dallas, mega church. One of the key things that he engages in is outreach to Muslims. Now, I don't have a problem with outreach to Muslims if you want to witness to them. But I'm not gonna host an imam for an interfaith conference. I'm not gonna chum around with Libyan imams. But that's what he does. And he also denigrates pro-Israel supporters and people who study Bible prophecy. I also asked Roberts for clarification on some things he's written, and I can't get past his assistant. I'm not going to talk to you, you know. They're not going to engage in this issue, because what they want to do is they want to present Palestinian propaganda, and they don't want any pushback. They just want you to shut up and take it and don't ask questions. Now, people ask me also from time to time, what explains this dislike of the Jewish people? Well, again, there's one answer. And as usual, it's found in Scripture. Have you ever read Genesis chapter 3? It's enmity. God himself instituted war between the evil one and the seed of the woman. God told us exactly what was going to happen. Who are the Jewish people? The Messiah came from the Jewish people. His mother was Jewish. people of Israel, the woman. It was set down from the beginning that this would be the way it is. You can't make sense of global anti-Semitism any other way. I defy you. I have a lot of very sophisticated, intellectual Jewish friends. They just literally scratch their heads over the issue of anti-Semitism. I say, why the Holocaust? Why? They can't understand it. You can understand it if you believe that Genesis is real history. Okay? Genesis and the rest of Scripture is real history. Much of the church doesn't believe that today. Is that not amazing? It absolutely amazes me on a daily basis. About 2 years ago, I became aware of a film called Little Town of Bethlehem. And it was being promoted by Lynn Hybels and her friends. And I watched it. And it's nothing more than PLO propaganda. Just straight down the line. Now, I want you to be aware, again, of how the other side uses spin and propaganda to influence people. They selected 3 men to interview for this film. A Jewish Israeli, a Palestinian Muslim, and a Palestinian Christian. Now that sounds like balance, right? Not when all 3 of them think Israel's the problem. Do you see? Do you see what they're doing? Guess who financed that film? Mark Green, president of Hobby Lobby and Mardell Christian Stores, based in Oklahoma City. I almost fell out of my chair when I saw the credits at the end of the film. I only knew about him because I'd been in the Christian book publishing industry. So I tried to get an interview with Mark Green. I wanted to know what was the root of his pro-Palestinian bent. You know what his answer was? Silence. He won't talk to me. Bill Oaksler, the producer, is there, second from right. They're at a screening that they did on college campus. They did these screenings all over the country. The film is making the rounds. We're getting close on time, aren't we? Okay. As I said at the outset, although we see this opposition and it leaves me dismayed, I still have to see the workings of the Lord in this. He told us it was going to be this way. What I didn't understand was that it would come from within my own community. And I think it's incumbent upon us to try to educate people as much as we can, pray for hearts and souls to be changed, because as we learn in Jeremiah, unless the sun and the moon stop giving their light, the Lord will uphold the Jewish people forever. And when I go to Israel and I sit at night and I watch the walls of the old city, they light them with floodlights. It's the most beautiful scene. And the moon is over the walls. And the next morning, you get up and the sun is shining. The Lord is in control. And so we're going to go on together, and we're going to go on believing the Lord for His promises, and it's all going to be okay. Thank you very much.